Just to introduce myself, my name is Elaine Chang. I'm the senior manager for global market development here at TerraWorks, and I'm joined by Erin Yamaoka, who's our technical account specialist. So thanks for joining. This is our new support session series that we're trying out. So it's meant to be kind of a series of quick overviews on technical issues. So would love to get your feedback at the end on how you think it goes. But just some housekeeping rules before Aaron takes it over. As I mentioned, I will be recording this session, and I will be unmuting everyone at the end. Everyone will be muted by default, um, and we'll take questions at the end. We have a pretty small group today, so hoping this will be more of an intimate discussion. So feel free to ask whatever questions you think will help your implementation. Um, and the other thing to note is that we are trying to make this client specific. So all of you guys are actual TerraWorks users, just to give you a sense of who's in the room. Okay, so with that, let me change the presenter over to you, Erin.
Okay, great. Okay, Elaine, can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay.
Oh, yep, I can see it.
Okay, great. So hi everyone, as Elaine said, I'm Erin from TerraWorks, and today we're going to do a quick session on a topic we get a lot of questions about, and that's Salesforce permissions for TerraWorks. Probably not going to be one of our more riveting topics of the series, but definitely something that comes up early and often when it comes to support. We're going to talk about the levels of Salesforce security briefly, TerraWorks profiles. We'll walk through some of the scenarios where this information becomes important, as well as a few helpful tips when working with Salesforce permissions. So Salesforce has many levels at which you can manage security in your instance. In this diagram, we have the level of security on the left, and then the ways you can implement security at each of those levels in the middle. At the highest level, you can configure settings that control people's access to the entire instance, such as setting up valid IP ranges or login hours. At the next highest level, you can control people's access to entire objects. You can control whether a user has read, write, edit, or delete access to the entire contact object, for example, via profiles and permission sets. Every user is assigned exactly one profile. Profiles define how users access objects and data, and what they can do within the application. A single user, however, can be assigned many permission sets. Permission sets allow you to extend access and contain many of the same settings found in profiles. So for example, I may have a large group of users that create TerraWorks surveys and jobs to which I've assigned the TerraWorks user profile. However, a few of these resources may also do some work in another area of our system, working with the more finance-related objects and fields. I can extend the permissions of just these users by assigning them the relevant permission set or sets. At the next level down, you can control people's access to individual records through what Salesforce calls a rule hierarchy. Every user can be assigned a single role. Based on where that role lives in this defined hierarchy, that user will have visibility to all the records that the roles beneath them can see. You can also set up specific sharing rules based on these roles. Finally, you can also define whether individual fields on an object are visible and read-only using profiles and permission sets as well. For TerraWorks, the Salesforce security tool you'll need to work with for access and permissions are profiles. In Salesforce, there are standard profiles and there are custom profiles. Similarly to standard objects, standard profiles came with your instance and were created by Salesforce. Everything else is a custom profile. When TerraWorks was installed in your Salesforce instance, permissions for all of the relevant TerraWorks objects and fields were mapped to two key custom profiles, the TerraWorks user profile and the TerraWorks partner user profile. For users that need to create surveys and jobs or manage mobile users and their performance in Salesforce, you can assign them the TerraWorks user profile. You can also leverage the system administrator profile, which means that user would have access to everything in the instance. Both profiles require a Salesforce license. The TerraWorks user profile will come configured with access to all of the TerraWorks objects and fields necessary to do back-end work. But if you want users with this profile to be able to access data in your custom objects, you'll need to grant them access on this profile, which we'll cover shortly. For users that need to complete jobs on their mobile devices to sync into Salesforce, you can assign them the TerraWorks Partner User Profile. This requires a partner community license, which is much less costly than a Salesforce license. This profile will come configured with access to all the necessary TerraWorks objects and fields for a front-end user to use TerraWorks. However, if you want users with this profile to be able to read or write to your custom objects or fields, you'll need to grant them access on the TerraWorks Partner User Profile. So when does this information become pertinent? There are 3 common scenarios: when you're performing an upgrade, when you're adding new users, and when you're adding new custom objects and fields. So let's take a quick peek at each of those so you can recognize when you'll need this information. As our customers are becoming more independent when it comes to upgrading, you may be performing the next upgrade for your organization when it comes to TerraWorks. When you follow the instructions on our customer support site, it will lead you to a screen that looks like this within your org. This is the first screen that you'd see when installing the managed package into Salesforce. You have 3 options: install for admins only, install for all users, or install for specific profiles. You're going to want to select install for specific profiles. And when you select that, you can see below that all the profiles that you have in your instance will be listed as options to map different levels of access to. So for the TerraWorks user profile and the TerraWorks partner user profile, you want to select the corresponding level of access. What this does is when you're upgrading TerraWorks and when we've created new features, there might be new objects and fields that are associated with those new features. So we need to grant additional access to each of these profiles, and those accesses will be granted based on this mapping. So that's the first common scenario. The second would be when you're creating users. So let's start walking through an example of creating a TerraWorks partner user, in other words, a mobile user. You'd start by creating a contact record. And partner users always have to be associated with a partner account. And then once you've saved the contact associated with a partner account, then you can enable that contact as a partner user, which opens the user record to be created. This is where you'd select a profile, a role, and also the type of license that the user record is going to be using. Apologies for the delay. Because we've created this user record in the context of enabling the contact as a partner user, apologies, it seems internet's a bit slow today. Only the relevant profiles for the partner users will be available to be selected. So you'd want to select the TerraWorks partner user, which will use a partner community license, and then the relevant role. There are separate role hierarchies for your partner users as compared to your internal users. When you created your community, you chose how many levels of that hierarchy you wanted to have. In this case, it was 3. So executive being the highest and user being the lowest. So you could also select an appropriate role. It's also possible that you only selected 1, so only 1 would be available. Then for the backend user, which is created directly out of the setup menu under Manage Users and Users, you select New User, and that'll open the same screen that we were just at without the constraints. So for a backend user, we're going to select the TerraWorks user. You could also opt to select a Salesforce admin, which will leverage a Salesforce license. And then you can also choose an appropriate role based on your internal role hierarchy. And the third scenario is adding a new custom field or object. So if I went to create a new object in Salesforce, because I'm about to deploy a whole new set of surveys and jobs for my field force, I'd go in the standard process, new custom object. I'll go ahead and save that and create a custom field as well. So when we create a custom object, we're not asked about who has permission to access that object. However, when you create a new custom field, apologies, lost connection there for a second.
I think you're just about to show us creating a new field.
Okay, let me backtrack here. Apologies, I hopped onto a network. Hopefully this one, different network. Hopefully this one is better. So we created a new object called new object, and we're just going to create a new custom field as well. Okay, but in contrast with creating a new custom object, when you create a new field, you are prompted for information about access and/or permissions. So you can choose whether or not the field is visible to different profiles, and if it is visible, whether or not it's going to be read-only. So the two pertinent profiles, again, are teryx partner user for your front-end teryx users and teryx user profile for your back-end teryx users. For this example, we're going to provide visibility to both. So the common mistake is that typically admins will create new custom profiles or new custom objects and new fields, create their new surveys and jobs, and map them appropriately and correctly. And then they deploy their job out to their field force, and everyone is getting an error when they try to sync in the data because the error is saying that they don't have the appropriate permissions to be able to write to a certain object or field. And that's because we need to grant the appropriate profile access to this new object that we've created. So if in this example of using a mobile user, if they're assigned the teryx partner user profile, that's the profile in which we need to grant access to this object. So looking at the profile, and all the profiles are set up the same. There are many sections, and it can seem to be overwhelming, especially if you have lots of objects in your instance. The two main sections that are pertinent for TerraWorks are scrolling down. The first section would be field level security. So all the objects in your instance are listed, and by clicking View, the object that we just created was called New Object. You can see all of the fields that are listed for that object, and you can edit whether or not they're visible and whether or not they're read-only if you'd like. As you can see, the profile already has visibility to all of those fields, so that's not the issue. The second pertinent section has to do with object level permissions. Scrolling all the way towards the bottom, there's standard object permissions and custom object permissions. If we take a look at the new object we just created, our field officers have 0 access to it. So by clicking Edit in the profile, we can give our field officers read, create, and edit access so that they can work with these records with TerraWorks. So that's a third pertinent scenario. Before we open it up for questions, I like to close with a few tips. The first one's really not related to TerraWorks, but it is best practice to never edit a standard profile. In order to always be able to reference what the default settings from Salesforce were, it's best to create custom profiles by cloning the standard profiles and renaming and making changes from there. The second, you could probably apply the same logic for TerraWorks profiles because you'd want to maintain a reference for the initial settings that TerraWorks gave you. However, we also have the original settings published on our customer support site. If you do choose to clone one of the TerraWorks profiles, it's important to include the word TerraWorks in the title of your custom profile. This makes all of the security junctions we discussed earlier easier and also allows for proper partner management when customers have partners in their instance that are not TerraWorks partner users. Finally, the profile views can be a bit overwhelming. So Salesforce has released an alternative view to manage permissions. So let's just take a quick look at that and you can choose which one you prefer. So in the setup menu, in order to turn on this alternative view, if you type user interface, and scroll down to the last section labeled setup, the third checkmark box is called enable enhanced profile user interface. If you check that, you're turning on this alternative view. Click save. Now when I go into my profiles, and we'll just go back into that TerraWorks partner user profile. Rather than, if you remember the screen we were talking about before, we were looking for the two pertinent sections, you're asked to select the area of the access and settings that you'd want to start with. So we're going to go into object settings, which is where all the pertinent TerraWorks settings are. And now you can see all the objects listed on the left that are in your instance. If you go back to that new object we just created, then in this view, you can see the object level and the field level permissions all in one screen. You can also use this arrow in the third level of the navigation to bounce back and forth amongst different objects. And then when you click edit, you can edit both at an object level and a field level at once. So it really depends on what your task is, what you're trying to achieve, and which parts you're editing as to which view is more efficient. But if you decide that this new view is not for you and you are comfortable and liked the old one, again, where you can locate the setting is by typing user interface into the setup menu, and then it's under the setup section. You can always turn it back off. However, I would recommend sticking with one or the other. It's just easier when you're working with your coworkers for them not to come into that menu or into profiles and be surprised. However, I would like to know all the documentation for TerraWorks to date is with the old profile views. Okay, I think that's all I had for today. I think we can open it up for questions, Lane.
Great. Cool, and apologies for the connection issues. So we are almost at the end of time. I'm going to just unmute everyone, just kind of jump in with questions. We have a small number of people today, because we're keeping it intimate. But I think if you have any follow-up questions about what Aaron's presented, feel free to reach out to our support site or to Aaron directly. Okay. Kevin, you're unmuted.
Hi, Kevin.
Hey, Aaron, how are you?
Good,
Quick
how are
question
you?
for you. You may have already said this, but can you just go over again what the difference between the executive manager and just regular user is in those three levels of partner users?
Sure. Yep. So I actually haven't implemented this myself, but I think there are a couple of customers currently that are interested in using this for the TerraWorks partner communities. But the three different levels are just in order from top to bottom. So I think it's just at an entire levels setting. the executives, and let me actually pull up the terminology again. Essentially, the first option has access to all of the records for the next two levels, and the second has the third, and then the user level only has access to its own records. But you can also create sharing rules with those roles, which is where I think the real power can come in.
Okay.
Welcome.
I have a question,
Any other
Erin.
questions?
I have a question. What are
Sure.
the related error codes to these types of settings, these setting issues? Or is
That's
it
a great
clear, I
question.
guess, from the error codes what the issue is?
It should be. So let me go ahead and pull up the relevant article on Zendesk. For those of you who haven't seen this, you can look at the mobile troubleshooting guide by error code. And typically the name of the object or field is included in the error message. So 0005 is the most common one that we get at the support desk, and it will specify the field and object name where the issue is. And so obviously if you're receiving this error on the mobile side, the issue is with either the TerraWorks partner user profile or the profile that you have assigned to that particular mobile user.
Great.
Question? I think we're at time. I apologize for the connection issue. If anyone has any further questions or anything they want to discuss, feel free to reach out at support@terraworks.org and we'll definitely get back to you.
And we'll also be sending this video out so you can use it as a reference. Thanks, everybody.
Great.
Cheers.
Thanks everyone for joining.